chat. I'll be monitoring that and happy to bring it up in the episode and see what we can learn together. So just give us one more second till we're live on all our platforms, and then we'll dive into this really amazing and deep episode. I'm really excited for this, Teresa. Thank you for being here today. So,
of course, no pressure. Deep.
Yeah, right. we can have fun with the serious stuff too, right? That's another thing someone told me. Just because it's serious doesn't mean you can't have fun with it. Okay, I see all 3 buttons are live, so I'm gonna get started here in a second. Go live. We're almost there. Okay, here we go. So welcome back to Coach Connect. Here's where we explore the stories and strategies and insights from trailblazers who are transforming the world of coaching and well-being. What drives their success and what fuels their passion for helping others? We're here to uncover their secrets and share them with you. This show is brought to you by Vibely.io, the all-in-one coaching platform designed to empower coaches with tools, resources, and support we need to thrive and help our clients achieve meaningful, long-lasting growth. I'm Dr. Diego Salinas, your guide on this journey today. As a neuroscientist, physician, and health coach, and co-founder of Vibely, I'm committed to celebrating the incredible work of coaches everywhere and helping them unlock their full potential. So together, let's dive deep into what makes coaching a powerful force of change. Our guest today, Teresa Young, is a master certified coach with the ICF and a board certified health and wellness coach. She specializes in leadership development, emotional intelligence certified coach, positive intelligence and positive psychology, communication and public speaking, conflict strategies, change management, career transitions, career coaching, team dynamics, flow states, I love too as well, Teresa, goal setting and sequencing, well-being habits, and work-life balance and satisfaction. Her goal is to help Hey, Teresa, sorry, it seemed like the internet lagged a little bit. Can you hear me?
It did. Yes, I can now. I was going to say, I don't know if I should start talking now or not.
Sorry, so maybe part of going live, that's part of the thing. So I was reading your bio, Teresa, and your incredible kind of work you've done. And usually to start off, I always want to kind of in your own words, what led you to, being where you are today, helping others? What kind of fueled this passion that led you to where you're standing now?
Wow, that's a deep question with a probably long response, but I think in part I've always been a coach. I think that's just my personality. That's the way I've always approached, whether it's dealing with peers when I was still in school or my children as they were growing up. It was always my instinct to ask questions and to try to understand where they were coming from before I sort of jumped in with a thought. And so I think part of it's just a natural tendency toward that. But I've also, because of the work that I've done, where I've done, some clinical work in healthcare settings. I've worked with women who've been sexually molested and abused. I've worked with veterans a lot who have PTSD and that sort of thing. And I think it really helped me understand my place in coaching, in terms of just wanting people to live their best life, whatever their circumstances were, and whatever they needed to process to get to where they could do that. It's just my life calling. And so I think, I'm a different kind of healer than you are, but I think it's that desire to heal and to restore people to function.
Yeah. Yeah. And what a, I mean, today's topic, right? When someone has gone through some grief or loss and how to kind of
Mhm.
restore or heal from that. And Teresa, this is a topic, I mean, as a human being, how does this not touch you? And one thing we talked about earlier is that when we think of grief and loss, often death comes to mind, right? But we're talking about behavior change. There's This goes way beyond that. So maybe could you, for all our also non-coach listeners, right, explain how else grief comes out in ways that we might discuss in this episode that people may not right away address or recognize as a form of grief.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it's, when we think about grief, we do think about death, and that is certainly one form of grief. But there are many kinds of grief, and grief manifests itself in many different situations. So it could be a new diagnosis for those of us who are health and wellness coaches. It could be the loss of a promotion for those of us who are business and leadership coaches. It could be
Mm,
restructuring where everything changes on a team and suddenly everything you knew and understood about how to do your job and who you were working with has changed. It could be getting married. It could be having a
mm,
baby. There's nothing really more disruptive than having a baby, which is also incredibly joyful. But there is a form of grief in leaving behind the sort of more carefree, less sleep
mm.
deprived life that you had before children. and
Right.
so so when we think about grief, I always tell people, especially coaches, it's helpful to think about the Bridges model of transition.
Mhm,
And so when we look at Bridges, what it tells us is really change is external, like a job loss, a diagnosis, a divorce, a death, restructuring. Transition is internal, and that's that
mm,
meaning making process that follows the disruption or the change. And it could
yeah.
be a death as well. I coached 5 people who lost team members last year to death, very suddenly, all
Oof.
of them. And so the whole
Wow.
team was thrown into chaos. And while the leaders are grieving, they also have to find a way to move the work forward, which also creates its own kind of grief, right? So we think about
Mm,
this change versus transition. So change is the external influence that causes the disruption, and transition is that process that follows. And coaching does not happen in change, it happens in transition. Grief is the transition, it's not the event. So I just want to clarify a little bit about how Bridges sees that. So when we think about the ending or the losing or the letting go, that can include loss of identity. Let's say,
mm,
okay, I'll give you a great example. When my youngest child went off to college, I grieved, okay? And it wasn't that I didn't want him to go. I did, and I'm so proud of what he's accomplished since he has gone and away and grown up. And that's what's supposed to happen, right? I'd be sad if he
right.
didn't do all that. But I was really grieving that whole thing, and because I knew it would never be the same. Never would I be able to just
Right.
ask him in the afternoon, "How was your day?" Never would he
Mm,
be home for dinner every night. It was just so. Even though the transition was very positive, I was grieving, and what I really grieved, and I remember saying this to a friend of mine. I said, "I don't have a rhythm anymore. I don't know who I am anymore." Because for years I was Rebecca and Andrew's mom, and now I don't know who I am. And so that comes up in our coaching. It can be something as simple as becoming an empty nester. So there's the loss of
mm,
identity, loss of assumptions. I thought my life would be this way. So I have a couple of friends who have never married. And there's all
mm,
this pressure, from the world around them to get married. And now they're in their 40s and 50s. And they're like, I don't think I ever want to get married anymore. But there's some grief to that, even though it's the positive choice they want to make, because it is a loss of the future they thought they were going to have, right? Um,
yeah.
and then there's the loss of control and predictability. It That's really difficult for all of us. So when people are resisting change, they're resisting loss. So many
Mm,
times, we'll jump right to, well, what do you want to do next? Or what might, bring you joy now that your child has gone off? You will only see them 3 times a year or something. And I always
yeah.
say, the better coaching language is something like, what feels like it's ending for you? And let them talk about it. What are you having to let go of, even if you didn't choose this? Because that maps directly to that acute grief. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, my brain's on fire here with the
I
examples
know it is.
and thoughts.
We've got two nerds going here, me and you. So it's like,
Yeah, let me digest some of that for me and our listeners. So I think a few things stood out to me. One was that the even positive events there's grief in positive events, right? Like your
Yes.
kids went to college. I remember when I went to college, like my dad was a lovely person, very sweet, but like I never seen him cry. His mom's like he the whole night was just inconsolable in the hotel room,
Yes.
right? And of course,
Yes.
what does he want more than his kid to go to his college of choice and do his career? And it's a loss of that
Yes.
acute grief. My sister, when she moved to Italy a few years ago, taking her to the airport, it's the grief and loss of I'm so happy for her living in Italy, getting her house, and it's not going to be the same going down the street, right?
I know.
People think of end of an era. You celebrate, finishing med school, grad school. It's it'll never be the same again, right? And I really love what you said there that grief is the process of change,
Yes.
right? And that I think can also be in a certain way also empowering. That says grief is how we make change. It is that process, a natural, not a one time event as well, right? Which there's a few thoughts here. The I love that question you said too. I've asked to my clients, what do you let go of to make this change? And it wasn't until you kind of brought it up in this context, Teresa, that I really realized, oh yeah, it's addressing that grief there. And I first thought it was like more of addressing what limiting beliefs do you have, right?
Exactly. We all do.
But
That's what we're trained to do,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right. Like for me, it's like, I don't know who I am anymore. If a coach might say to me, well, let's look at your limiting beliefs around that. What else do you do that's blah, blah, like, that's too much too soon, because here's the other part of grief, whether it's grief because of something happy or grief because of something sad, is capacity. I did not, if you had come to me, no matter how good of a coach you are, and you had said to me, well, what would it look like for you to move forward? Or what brings you joy? Or what? I would have just hung up on you probably, because I did not have the emotional capacity at that point to have that conversation. So sometimes I think as even really good coaches, well-trained coaches, we skip forward. We try to push a result or try to move them out of this uncomfortable for us place instead of letting it happen. I remember being in a coaching session with someone, well, this has happened more than once actually, where for 45 minutes they cried. Yeah. And you know what? That's what needed to happen. And they didn't need me saying, well, what would it look like for you to, or, if you can imagine a year from now, they needed me to say, I know this hurts. I know you're in pain. How can I support you? This is where the distinction gets weird, though, Diego.
I love the nitty gritty and the
yes.
the gray. Let's go into there.
It's staying in scope, right? Because some of us are trained and some of us are not trained in other modalities. Right. So you might have a coach who is also a licensed clinical social worker or a therapist, but most coaches are not trained to do that. So it's really important to kind of know how to stay in scope in moments like that. And so what I always tell people is, you're not trying to diagnose illness or disease or condition. You're trying to diagnose where the person is in terms of their ability to respond, to feel, to move forward, capacity. And that coaches can learn to do and still stay in scope. The other thing you have to learn, and you and I have talked about this, is when is it time to refer out? Because if, acute grief is one thing, staying in that phase for too long can become pathological. But we as coaches have to work really hard not to diagnose a pathology, but we refer out for a pathology, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There's two things stories coming to mind as you mentioned that, Teresa. So I love you. We can diagnose motivation,
Hmm.
right? And that's kind of our specialty is where in the behavior change process. Actually, I was with some friends, some dear friends last night. Friends from one of my best friends in the world from medical school. His birthday yesterday. Came to Miami, watched the U.S. Open with his other couple friends, and they have
Nice.
kids. One has a 4 and a 1 year old. The other one just has an 11-month old, and they were giving advice to the mother, the 11-month old, saying like, you got to do sleep trainings and this, and they're like, he's Diego, he's a pediatrician. You got someone here in front of you trying to take advantage of this, right? And so she's kind of like, oh, I guess I don't want to talk about it. I'm like, she seems like she doesn't want to really approach this, and then they kind of with good intentions, like try to be like, no, we can help. And then they tell me all this stuff, and I'm like, what I'm hearing right now is a few times said, I don't want to make a change
Yeah.
because she's like, I'm not ready for this. It's gonna be traumatizing. And I'm like, and they're like, but helpful. I'm like, guys, she is in pre-contemplation, and part of the behavior change theory is being in pre-contemplation, diagnosing that. I'm like, listen, whenever you are curious, I know awesome sleep coaches for kids who would honor your values, let him not cry, et cetera, et cetera. But really, and then they're like, and I'm like, listen, and your friend is helping you out because he's your friend, and I'm your friend slash this other perspective I have, right? So that we can diagnose motivation, and when you see capacity being limited,
Yes.
right? The you know this will tie to the grief being like a cute thing as well. But I remember a client I was coaching at a university in North Carolina. I was like they had this program for students to expand their access to well-being, and so they had coaching as part of this process. And one of the students working with, mostly we're working on like kind of ADHD kind of symptoms or organization, that kind of stuff. But one session she came in, she's like, my grandma passed away yesterday. It was kind of expected a little bit, but it was always still kind of sudden at the same time. And her mom was, the daughter who passed away was extremely distraught. She's dealing with all this, and she's just like, I just can't today. I just don't know what to do. I am overwhelmed. Like, and I had to. It was during finals
Zero
period.
capacity. Zero
Zero
capacity.
capacity, right? It was during finals period too, right? And she's like, I don't know what to do. And so I basically pushed that back. I'm like, right now, you feel overwhelmed. Making any decision or choice is really hard. I was like, and instead of saying like we can get through, I'm like, do you need, because right now you mentioned your capacity is hard and you have no idea how you could possibly write this email to your professor to ask for an extension, let them know you have to go home. Since your capacity is limited, do you want us to do that together? Right? Because normally in coaching, I would say, no, it's about you doing it. But she is telling me she's incapable. And I'm like,
Exactly.
okay, I can share my screen, type out a few sentences, ask if it's okay. Because I know in this step, it's not because I'm not trying to do it for her, right? But
Right.
she's telling me right now, this is what I need, right?
Right.
So I also think as coaches, there is sometimes in those situations when you're diagnosing motivation, when it could be okay as a provider to do it for them
Hmm.
in that acute phase for a little, but not to create dependency, right? What are your thoughts on that, Teresa?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So you're talking about the trans-theoretical model of change for any coaches who aren't familiar with that. And if you're not familiar with it, please get familiar with it. It's really important.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly running every scenario with every client I have every time, even people I've coached for a decade. Every
Yeah.
conversation I'm running through that model. Where are they? Where are they on the model? And it goes back and forth, as you know. And I'm glad you brought up the ADD because I have something, don't let me forget, that I want to say about that that's really important. But here's the thing to answer your direct question, which is, yes, there are times when someone is so incapacitated, has literally zero capacity, that we can ask, and you did so beautifully, would it be helpful if I step in and support you on this? And here's how I do it. I say
Mm.
something like, would it be okay with you if I take off my coaching hat right now? Because I
Ooh.
feel like this is I make it clear I am no longer coaching you in this
Yeah.
moment. And
Yeah. Yeah.
then
Yeah.
I might say, I'm going to take off my coach's hat and I'm here to support you. Would it be helpful if we did this together? And I had the same scenario where I had a manager. This is one of the people who lost a team member very suddenly. And she had just found out about it. She called me immediately and needed an emergency session. She was grieving. This was a young woman who passed away unexpectedly
Mm.
and a very important team member. And she said, I have to not only tell the team, but I have to move the work forward because we're under some deadlines and she said, I don't know what to do. And I don't know how to have that conversation. And I said, in that moment, I knew she was crying. She was very upset. I knew that this was not a moment for me to say, well, what feels like a good next step for you? Or, well, if you
Mm.
could say anything to me that we could then, translate, what would it be? No, she just needed some help. And I said, do you want me to take off my coaching hat for a second? And let's just talk about communication and how you might communicate this. And we did. And then the next session, I said, okay, my coach's hat's back on.
Mhm.
Although that took weeks to resolve, by the way. But I think something that a lot of people miss, and you brought it up, and let's follow that thread. Let's pull that thread for a second,
Let's do
is,
it.
is the ADD, ADHD, any kind of spectrum issues, all kinds of processing issues. Talk about grief. So this is one of my coaching specialties, and I have, some training in this. And what I will tell you is that many people who have ADD, ADHD, who are on the spectrum, who have other types of processing issues, have grieved their entire lives because they've been told they were stupid, or they didn't do things the right way, or they were lazy, or they couldn't follow through on
Yeah.
things. And as coaches, if you know someone has a diagnosis, please don't make the diagnosis. But if you know someone
Right.
has the diagnosis, then that has to be the foundation of your coaching, because not only are you doing that work to help them like organize and develop systems and all those things, you're also remembering that they have grief and pain underneath that,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they're carrying with them. And I think sometimes we go straight to, what do you want to accomplish by the end of this session? And they're like,
Yeah.
oh, well, I want to be more efficient. And you're like, okay,
Yeah. Pomodoro
without
technique. Look at this.
exactly. And listen, we need techniques, but,
Right. Right.
but I think, so the way I approach this is, I tell every client this at the beginning. So I have sort of the standard thing I say at the beginning of a new coaching engagement. I say, first of all, everything we talk about is confidential with 3 exceptions. If you tell me you're going to harm yourself, and if that's the case, please tell me, because I'm a suicide prevention specialist. So let me help you. If you tell me you're going to harm someone else, or if you tell me you're going to commit a crime, I will take action on all 3 of those. So I tell them that immediately so that they don't have to self-disclose if they don't want to.
Mhm.
And I have had those things happen, by the way, except for the
Yeah.
breaking the law.
Good.
But the other thing I say to them is, and I want you to know, I see you as a whole person. So what I would say to you is, you're not just Diego, the founder of a company and a physician. You're a human being. You're a brother. You're a husband, a father, a son, a citizen. And I, I address you as a whole person. And to
Mm.
someone who has struggled their whole life and masked their whole life to hide their ADD, ADHD, or spectrum situations, you will engender trust, because there's so much grief underneath all of that. That is pretty powerful in a coaching setting. Just
Definitely
letting
gave
them
me
know.
goosebumps just even thinking that. And I love you pull that thread. This reminds me, my favorite thing is, Angela's seeing or it was Teresa's where the consciousness goes, what threads are going to come up. It reminds me, I was reading a book about ADD, ADHD, or spectrum, and I think it said, I'm probably going to misquote the figure, but people with this diagnosis before the age of 18 had like 12,000 more negative comments made to them than those
Yes.
without, or something
Yes.
that, you're to this, you're to that, right? And the number was asked to me, it was like 12, something that was definitely significant, right? And how then
Right.
you mask that or hide that. And me myself, once I was 30 or something, that was diagnosed after medicine, because in medicine, actually in hospital work, ADHD is very helpful tool,
It is
right?
very
It'll quickly
helpful.
bounce from set. It's not good or bad. These are things that serve or don't serve depending on the context, right? It's also why I'm associative mind and can make different connections. But it's also then why I'd struggle with more linear tasks and in my own journey. By the way, I also think just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean you know how to treat people with that diagnosis.
Oh,
Right? Just because of how she
absolutely.
sees me, I'm an HD specialist. I think there's also this like, well, I have this, but every brain's different too, right? So I say this with that utmost respect, that in my journey, I'm just kind of sharing part of that experience, not necessarily them do the same thing for all the clients who might have another journey. But I remember thinking, like, You first start with techniques, important, Pomodoro. But then later on reading, most of procrastination is really an emotion dysregulation issue.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
That's what the procrastination is emotion dysregulation. I'm like,
Which nobody
this is
tells
emotion
you.
dysregulation. It's not
Yes.
that it's Pomodoro. It's anxiety, it's fear, it's the loss of what if I don't do it or da-da-da. And that masking of being, in my case, feeling so sometimes capable yet incapable at the same time. It feels very lonely in that situation. It's like a secret you feel you have.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been asked in 2 separate occasions by 2 separate national organizations, one in Canada, one in the United States, both HR organizations, to talk to them about how they mismanage the hiring and development of people with ADD, ADHD, or spectrum disorders, and several others. I include a bunch of things, any neuroprocessing situation.
Yeah.
And I tell them all the time, you are creating conditions that cause you not to be able to see the gifts in the people that you're working with. And I will say both of the organizations have changed because of a result of those conversations. And so I think it's critically important that we as coaches, we're coaching these people for these organizations. And it's more common than people think. And you have to remember that, you talked about these negative comments. So if I give you 10 compliments and I say one hurtful thing to you, what are you going to focus on?
Oh, that negative bias our brain has. It's all
The negative bias, of course. And people don't get this, but I tell them this is an evolutionary sort of development. So millions of years ago, when we're hunter-gatherers, if we're standing out in the field and we're picking some blueberries and you see a bush over in the distance moving, you'd better assume it was something that's going to kill you. Because if you're wrong, if you say, oh, it's probably just the wind, you're dead, right? So we develop this negative bias. And it takes a lot to overcome negative bias for all of us, even those of us, I don't have any of those things. And you can hurt my feelings, right? And I'm not going to forget it easily. And so when you've got someone who's had all of this negativity put on them for years, and especially, someone like you who's brilliant, clearly, and yet you feel competent and incompetent all at the same time. As coaches, it's really important. That's a very important distinction because there's grief under that. It's important to remember that we have to develop that inner champion in that other person. It's all in how you ask a question. You have to be careful how you ask questions because a question can feel like a judgment if you're not very careful as a coach.
Oh, yeah.
So, so for someone that I know has struggled already, let's say they want to get up and run every morning. That's their goal. I want to start running every morning. I can give you techniques all day long that are going to help you do that, right? I get it. But if I say to you, well, you say you want to do this, but something's getting in the way, what seems to be the problem here? Something like that, which I hope most coaches would never say. That's a judgment. If I say, well, what would make it easier for you? How can we remove a barrier for you? Then I'm not playing into their sort of negative bias. And I always tell my clients, especially the ones I work with that are very self-critical, and many of them do have, some sort of different process. I always say different processing style. It's not bad, just different.
Right. Yes. Different. It's certain situations, right?
Just different. We're all unique. I always say, look, I want you to have an inner critic because if you don't, you're a psychopath. Like that's the easiest definition of a psychopath that I can give you. They have no inner critic. But I also want you to have
I love that.
Yeah. That's not clinical, by the way. It's just my own way of looking at it. I'm like, But I also I want your inner champion to be as strong. So I know people don't see maybe directly how that plays into grief, but trust me, it does. Because when you have that strong of an inner critic, you are grieving. You're grieving the disappointment of who people expected you to be, and you're not. You're grieving that other people can maybe do something more easily than you or differently than you. And so we have to be very careful. And I think the biggest thing that I would say to coaches is you don't have to become a neuroscientist, to be a good coach. Although I think it helps. But you don't have to do that. doesn't hurt.
Right.
But I think you have to understand the neurobiology of grief. So is that a thread I can pull?
You were great minds think alike, right? That's
Yes.
where I was kind of going to next when we start talking about negative bias of the brain, right?
Yes, exactly.
And to your point, right, that negative bias, it doesn't mean it's how we're hardwired, I say. It's part of our physiology, our survival. You have to learn
Yes.
right away. And here's the example I always give to, let's say I was giving a talk one time and I said, here's the thing. Everyone listening right now, for example, if you're wearing shoes or socks, which shoe or sock is tighter than the other one? Right? Or if you're not wearing socks, where do you feel the line on your shirt, on your thing, or your back of your neck, or your waistband? Or if you're wearing glasses like I am, right? For my whole life. Those signals were there before I asked you that question. You're just only now attending to them.
Yes.
Right? So your brain's receiving so much data constantly.
Your reticular activation system.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. It has to filter too. So our brain has this, let me filter the negative much more.
Yes.
And here's an example too. I say, you never think about the room temperature unless it's too hot or too cold. You know, walk in and be like, oh, it's a perfectly room temperature room. It's always like, oh, I'm a little sweaty or it's kind of cold, right? Your brain just, again, if it's not bothering you, why attend to it? Another silly example could be, if you stub your toe, you don't think, wow, my left hand feels perfectly fine.
Right.
It's just that toe pain, it's all consuming.
Yes.
So so that's the neurobiology is we're going to go next. That and if I could add one more thing too, you mentioned that negative judgmental questions. You know, one thing I'll say coaching, we also have open-ended questions. And even though why is open-ended, I say try to avoid why because it can sound judgmental. Like if I say, hey, Teresa, why'd you wear that shirt today?
Yes.
Well, versus like, what made you choose?
Something wrong with my shirt? Yeah.
Exactly. The first response is
exactly.
Why you have to defend yourself. So I would love to explore the neuro biology of grief, and then I have one thing that I remember when I was going through a very big grief process. I was very acutely aware of one of these things. So I'll let you start the conversation, Teresa. But well, maybe before exploring neurobiology, maybe can I briefly talk about how maybe acute grief is actually beneficial in a certain way, right?
Sure.
And the metaphor that we compared earlier, I always say, you know, if someone rolls their ankle, you see your friend fall and trip, roll their ankle, we kind of just get them up and help them walk to the car or get there, right? It's very common across cultures and history when there is a period, let's say grief of loss of family, the community comes together, right? 2 weeks they were cooking for them, doing those things, right? And then when when you're sad, you're going through heartbreak.
Yes, all the things.
Yeah. Right, you go through breakup and your friends come and hang out and do whatever, right? It's a normal part of it, and the difference.
And trash talk the person that broke up with you. That's part. Just so everybody's clear, that's what you have to do, even if you like them.
They
were awful.
Good.
I didn't like their shirt.
Why'd they wear that, right?
Why'd they wear that shirt all the time?
Yeah, but and to your point, that there's a natural process. The problem is when this becomes chronic, like inflammation is a natural way to heal, but it's problems chronic. So Teresa, let's dive in a little bit to the neurobiology of grief. Because I think to me, if I can add one more context here, is that maybe because I'm a curious nerd is helpful, but I think also for me personally, my personal experience of going through life, sometimes these things help hang my hat on, oh, okay, this is natural to feel this. And it allows us to second step back, see that in a kind of metacognitive way, and that gives me some sort of strength to approach again, whether it's look at psychology and say intellectualization, whatever it is. For some, it's really helpful knowing the process. So for us nerds out here, let's dive into the neurobiology of
yes, and we need a separate session to talk about the RAS, right? Because in coaching, if you understand the RAS, you have leveled up your coaching up to here. I use it every day. I use it all the time because I know how to use it, and it's so important. But yes, we'll do that another day.
If we can touch it, if not next episode, I would love to have you back on already.
Yeah, Diego and I can talk about this stuff all day, whether anybody else is interested or not. So what I always tell people is in your brain, grief activates multiple systems. So there's the emotional processing of grief. That's done in the limbic system. That's the seat of our emotions, right? There's threat detection. That's done in the amygdala. There's memory and meaning. That's done in the hippocampus. And then, of course, there's executive function, which is in the prefrontal cortex. And that's why grief can feel like confusion and exhaustion and anxiety and disorientation.
That brain fog.
The brain is overloaded. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the brain treats loss like a threat to survival. So, we've seen this in imaging when there's a loss or when someone's experiencing something really deeply, like a death, the amygdala lights up because the brain
Hmm.
interprets it as something essential to my survival is gone. And what
Yeah.
that can trigger is either fight, flight, or freeze, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
hypervigilance, emotional reactivity, and even in non death grief, like a divorce or a job loss or a diagnosis, the brain still responds as if its literal safety has been compromised.
Yeah.
The other thing is the attachment system, and it keeps searching.
Mm.
So, humans are hardwired for connection. We need it, we crave it, we want it. Even an introvert like me still wants
Yeah.
connection, right?
Yeah.
And so the brain builds these neural maps of attachment. And when loss
Hmm.
occurs, the brain doesn't immediately just update reality like, okay, well, that's gone now, or that person's gone now, or I didn't get that job, so I guess that's over now. It continues to expect the person or the role or the situation to exist. So
Yeah.
this creates that experience of, I keep thinking I should call them, or this doesn't feel real, or oh, I forget they're gone. Or I'm going to call and ask why they didn't pick me. It's that continued sort of attachment to what you thought was going to be. And
Yeah.
this is sometimes called protest in attachment theory, where the
Mm.
brain's searching for what's missing. It can really affect relationships moving forward. So let's say you're a widow or a widower and you've had this incredible relationship with someone that you love deeply. And you sort of do this thing where it's like, I can't even imagine ever being with anyone else or ever
Right.
loving anyone else. And so then the prefrontal cortex goes offline, right? And it becomes less effective because, and this is what's so critical for coaches to understand. During grief, whether it's about death or anything else, even good things, decision making declines, focus decreases, and emotional regulation weakens. So clients may present as unmotivated or struggling to follow through, or as you said, foggy or scattered. But it's not resistance. It's literally reduced cognitive capacity. It's chemical, it's
Yeah.
biological.
Yeah.
Even more so, memory and time get disrupted because the
Oh
hippocampus
yeah.
gets involved, right? So
Right.
grief impacts how memory is processed. Past memories can feel really hyper vivid, present awareness can feel blurry, and the future becomes harder, impossible to imagine. To go back to my example, when Andrew left for college, and he went out of state, of course, which is good for him.
Mhm.
But when he went to college, like I couldn't even imagine what life was going to be like without him there because we were so
Right.
close. So just the very idea of somebody saying, "Oh, well, I mean, imagine you'll get to go do this." I was like, I can't even think about that because I didn't have
Right.
the capacity to be able to do that, and that's why you might often hear clients say things like, I can't think past today, or time feels weird, or everything reminds me of that. Like, every
Mm.
time I see the guy that got the job instead of me, kind of thing. But then we get
Right.
into rumination, right? And that's because the brain is trying to answer what happened and why, and what does this mean? And
Right.
so it creates these repetitive thought loops that we call rumination. And
Right.
this is where it gets really weird because that's the default mode network, right? It's that narrative processing system. And what I want people to hear is these loops are not dysfunction, they're meaning making in
Mm.
progress. So, grief is physically exhausting because neurochemistry is shifting. Grief alters our neurotransmitters. You can probably speak to this more than I do.
Mhm.
Dopamine goes down, that equals low motivation and low pleasure, right? Serotonin goes
Yep.
down,
Yep.
mood
Serotonin.
instability.
Yep.
Cortisol goes up, stress and inflammation. And what does that lead to?
Right.
Fatigue,
Yeah.
sleep disruption, appetite
Memory
changes,
fog.
memory
Yeah.
fog, weakened
Lower
immune
hippocampal
response.
size. Yeah. Hmm.
So, what I always tell coaches, especially in the course that I teach, is that grief is biologically taxing. Like it's just heavy on your body. It's that somatic response, right? And so then you get that identity disruption, because it's like questions get asked like, well, who am I now without this? So let's say somebody doesn't get a promotion they were expecting, or they are laid off, which is happening a lot in the world today. Who am I now? Or my son goes off to college and I'm like, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't have any rhythm. I don't have a pattern anymore. I don't understand. The pattern was this person got up and went to work and did a job and walked down to Starbucks and got a coffee and had lunch with a coworker and all. Well, if they get laid off, who are they now? Because those neural networks are tied to identity have to reorganize. So people can feel ungrounded. They can feel a loss of direction. And the one I'm famous for, existential questioning. It's like, what does it all mean? Why? And you and I talked about this before the cast, and I think it's important to bring this up. Grief comes in waves. It's not linear because the brain, and again, this is all neuroscience, the brain processes it in cycles. It can't stay in that one place. Like, we're just not built that way. So you got the trigger, which is the activation. You've got processing and partial integration. Like, the person in a death, the person's gone, but you don't accept it really. And then you rest and you've got some temporary stabilization, and then it all repeats. And the brain is going through integration. And I don't like it when people talk about closure, because there's not a delete function for attachment.
That's powerful, Teresa.
Yeah, when you're deeply attached to someone, we know this from attachment theory, just because you're not with them or just because they die does not change the attachment. So that's why modern grief science emphasizes, and you and I talked about this earlier, continuing bonds and meaning reconstruction and adaptive integration. Now, what I want to say to coaches who are listening to this is, when you have someone who's experiencing grief of any kind, for any reason, whether it's a little or a lot, their capacity is reduced. It has nothing to do with their character. Your client's not failing. Their brain is overwhelmed. That behavior makes sense neurologically. So forgetfulness, fatigue, avoidance, all that's expected. And your role is regulation before transformation. So first we stabilize them, then we explore meaning, and then we support forward movement. So grief work is really about pacing the nervous system, not pushing insight. So grief is not just emotional, it's neurological. And when you understand the brain, you stop misinterpreting your clients.
That last phrase I really love a lot, because it's true. The more we can understand what's going on, and I think it helps a lot with that, because a lot of things we didn't talk about too is that there's a lot of grief and loss, or shame sometimes, and guilt. Right. So you go through divorce. Well, it was my fault, or my identity, and now I don't have this job, right? And so that the patient nervous system, and that this process is going to go on too. I tell a marathon analogy, right? It's like you're trying to continue moving, get back on your feet, and so it's gonna change isn't linear, so neither is grief, because grief, as you mentioned, is a process of change. And you touched on this, Teresa, and what I was thinking of before I asked the question of biology was when I've gone through divorce, and I remember when I was like waking up one morning and going to that loop, because you have a default mode network, right? So for those who don't know, it's kind of like when you get online, who you are, what it is, right? Otherwise it'd be exhausting in the morning. Who am I? I'm Diego. I'm the co-founder. It's just who you are, you're back online, right? The Windows has started up, or Mac, whatever you want to use.
You've rebooted.
You're rebooted, right? You're back online. And so I remember the default mode is like, okay, and let's, call your partners who lunches, and then it just this cascade of, they're not my partner. This is no longer in my house. We're going to sell it soon. And then there was a moment of me that was like, because of that neuro background, and I've been coaching for a few years already at that point too, which definitely helped, and working my own resiliency and all this stuff. So even though it was acutely hard, I could definitely see some of that old skill set or practicing coming to play. And I was like, oh yeah, it's going to take a while for my neurons to rewrite this script, right? That it's not this is not my home anymore. It's not my partner. Like those routine things. So I think that's
Yeah.
also looking at the neurobiology of that can take some of that guilt or shame away. It is a
Yes.
normal thing. It took a while to build that. It's going to take a while to build that new road. And all those things you mentioned, like imaging studies, there are parts where you see someone like the anterior cingulate cortex, right? You see it light up during physical pain and also
Yes.
during emotional pain. Heartache
Exactly.
is real,
Yes.
right? As you mentioned earlier
Yes.
so nicely, that all that
Broken heart
limbic system
syndrome.
taking.
It's a real
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
It
it's a real
actually
thing, right?
happens. Yeah. And we
And
also
you
know
know, to
what
some
we know what that does to our immune system response too, right? You can speak to that. It's like
exactly.
this is not just sadness.
This
It's
is
not just
physiology.
disappointment. It's
And something
physiology.
you said earlier, Teresa, it was like, I don't know if it was before the episode started recording or not, but you know, it's all the same physiology and biology. Like someone asked me one time, what's the difference between mental and physical health? And I was like, there's no difference. It's in my simple version, Teresa, is we're all one bag of skin. It's all in the same bag. It's all in the same container.
It
Of
is.
course, they're related, right? I'm glad we're talking about each parts of the container and telling how it works together, but they're not different. And so then, of course, you feel tired, you don't want to eat, iPad is gone, you don't sleep well, so it's hard to have
Yeah.
brain fog. And this cycle is there. And so our job is to, like I said, how do we reset or pacing the nervous system, kind of following along, seeing those cues when there are times to have those moments of hope or understanding moving
Mhm.
forward. Um, and actually, this something said before episode 2 was at some point acceptance of what happened, and that acceptance
Mhm.
doesn't mean you condone it or you like it, but you have to accept that's your new starting point. Actually, Teresa, I did have one more thought. You mentioned that this idea of yearning for the loss, right? It's a chemical
Mhm.
neurochemical withdrawal, right? Let's just give
Yeah.
you
Oh,
dopamine, serotonin,
absolutely.
oxytocin,
Yes.
right? Safety. It is
Yep.
a neurochemical withdrawal to have a parent die, a partner separate from you, right? So that's why that yearning, that I need to figure out why. There's so much going on there,
Yeah.
and luckily the brain can heal because it's also neuroplastic as well.
Yes. And it's interesting, and we as coaches can facilitate that. We can promote that with our clients. It's also interesting. I see this a lot in because I coach for a lot of like Fortune 10 companies, and I see this a lot when there's been a restructuring or layoffs or somebody didn't get a job they wanted, where it looks like there's this huge loss of motivation afterwards. So if
Hmm.
you're just thinking about it, if you're just in your head, right? What you would do after the loss of a promotion, let's say, is you'd work even harder, right? Like you'd say, I'm going to show them that, I mean, that's the logical thing to do. It's like, I'm going to do such a good job that the next time this comes up, they'll have to pick me. The problem is that's not how our brains work. And that's not how the chemicals in our brain work. So when we see that drop in motivation, and we go back to that trans-theoretical model, we have to remember that their capacity is just not there yet. And if we skip right to, well, what can you do you think to increase your visibility at work? It's like, please don't
Mm,
go there yet. You can go there, but don't go
yeah,
there yet. Um, and it's true. And I did want to say one final thing about attachment,
please.
about
Yes.
attachment and continuing bonds.
I was
And
going
this
to ask you to go back to that, actually, continuing bond theory.
Yeah, yeah. So continuing bond theory is fascinating, and we used to think of grief as something you just need to get over, right? Like just eventually she'll get over it, or eventually he'll deal with it and accept it and get over it. And there is a degree of acceptance. I mentioned to you before the podcast that I had lost someone very close to me about 24 years ago now, and I have accepted the fact that he is dead because he is. He's very dead. But because we have a continuing bond and because there was a great deal of attachment there are still things that I carry with my own life and with the way I am and the person I am. And it's that idea of there are some people who shape us in ways that are powerful. And just because the bond ends, it's a divorce, it's a death, it's a change of job, and you don't have that mentor anymore. We have these continuing bonds, and it's actually quite healthy. So that brings up the distinction of when do you know when to refer out? Like, what's the intervention process where you're like, you know what, this has crossed into something that I'm not qualified to deal with. They need therapeutic intervention. I tend to be very direct about that. I tend to say, I am here to support you in any way that you need, but this is outside the scope of my practice, because I'm very clear. It doesn't matter what, like you're trained in medicine, but you're not going to treat medically a client or diagnose, right?
Exactly.
As a coach. So I'll
Exactly.
say this is outside of the scope of our arrangement or outside of the scope of my practice. Would you be open to talking to a clinician about this? So that's when we have to decide, like, what's just ongoing sort of bond and what has crossed over into something that's debilitating for the client. And what I would say is that's different for every client. If I see a client who's stuck in a place, it's interesting. I don't know if you know who she is, but there's a woman named Edie or Edith, and her last name starts with an A. I can't think of what it is. She's in her 90s. She's a psychologist. And her entire family, I think, was killed in the Holocaust. And she made it to the United States. And she was being interviewed, and I was watching this interview, and it was so powerful. I bought her books because unbelievable. But they asked her, how did you talk about grief? Come on. She came to the United States with no money, no education, and no one. And now she's a successful psychologist, well-known, had a great practice. And the question in the interview was, how did you get past it? And her answer was, you don't get past it. I still grieve it. But here's what she said that was so powerful. And this isn't, I think this is a religious reference, but she didn't mean it in a religious way. She said, I think it's okay to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, but you can't camp there.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty amazing. So when you feel like your client has camped in this place and they're stuck, even sometimes bringing up. The other thing I look for, frankly, is substance abuse. And if you've built a close enough relationship with your client, they will sometimes tell you. I've had many clients tell me that they were struggling with a substance, and I've been able to refer them out for treatment. So if you think their mental health is being affected, or you think their physical health is being threatened, then it's a non-negotiable. You have to refer out. That doesn't mean you can't still be their coach. But
right, it's
if they're in trouble, yeah.
And I think you can still. I've told this story before in other episodes, but I had a client who one time went through a traumatic episode of almost having gun violence happen to them, and I was like, "This is trauma. I just because I know of it and read it, I'm not a trauma-informed provider. Like, you need to see someone." And we saw each other. They would do their sessions on Monday, and we would do a follow-up later on. And he's like, "You've been my guy for transition my whole adult life. You're my rock, and thank you for that 2-month period." Yes. And you can help your clients find a therapist as your action set that week, right? We went through that list of his insurance company, et cetera. And that is a beautiful phrase of, you can walk through the valley, but don't camp there, because to the point of, you said earlier about closure, and that kind of really being a misnomer, right? Because you carry it with you your whole life, the good and the bad, right? The continuing bond theories that you carry it with you your whole life. And that's why your parents or grandparents lived through you, because you also had that same generosity of spirit or that same love of cooking. So you carry that loss with you too. So kind of, that's how ways in a double-edged sort of life, right? That those be that good and the bad, and how to live in harmony with both of those versus one. To your point, weighing you down. And I might add, Teresa, what do you think about this? You mentioned, if they're seeing mental changes, physical changes, substance abuse. I think also if there's a lot of dysfunction in their life, so now they can't keep up with their work, so it affects their employment, right? Like, you start seeing dysfunctions at all points of their life, maybe more lashing out people who are close to them, right? If it's affecting their life, it becomes dysfunctional. That's where think about therapy or clinicians when dysfunction is happening.
Absolutely. No, I absolutely agree. And some of us are pretty good at being able to diagnose depression. And I have and still do sometimes ask my clients to take a depression survey if I think that there's some depression going on, but I'm not treating them.
Right.
If I might, and we know that depression and anxiety, again, biologically based, the depression and anxiety are prevalent, especially among young people under the age of 40. And so being aware of that, and it's funny, I love something you said earlier that I want to circle back to, and I know we're almost out of time, But you were talking about this idea of if if you roll your ankle, you're not thinking about, well, but my hand feels fine. That's actually, though, a technique that we use a lot, especially in the mindfulness community, and so when I'm working with a vet who is experiencing a lot of pain in all parts of his body, usually,
Yep.
I'll say, is there any place on your body that doesn't hurt? And the first answer is always no. Everything hurts. And I'll say, what about the tip of your nose?
Yeah,
and they'll be like, well, I mean, the tip of my nose doesn't hurt. And I'll say, well, let's bring all of our attention to the tip of the nose. And we'll do some breathing stuff. And many of them say, that is the first moment of relief I have found in years. Wow. It's all about attention. Wow. So I know that's not a grief thing, although believe me, these veterans are grieving.
Yeah.
But sometimes people do lose perspective, and the body does keep score of all those things. Yeah. And the somatic work is another place that we could talk all day, but we won't today.
Yeah, we'll have to do the series, Teresa, here, and yes. Maybe I'll do a brief little add-on to that. I always say, I look at gratitude practice as a neurobiology version of undoing a negative bias. Gratitude practice is not about kumbaya, which is great, by the way, right? It's not about like, oh, the world's amazing. It's like just factual. Like, oh, yes. I have running water. I have a cell phone that works and I can drive where I want to. It's not making things up because our brain doesn't notice those things, right? Our brain doesn't be thankful that I have a coffee maker make coffee when I come in the morning, right? And so
because we haven't told our RAS to focus on it.
Exactly. And once you start training that system,
yes,
you start seeing positive more things. And maybe I'll tell us for next time we can explore this more, but I tell people, do your gratitude practice and do three different categories. We ask them what they're thankful for. The first one tends to be very big things, my family, my kids, my job. Like, okay. Now do three things that are common, but that are really helpful, but you don't think about often. I think credit cards. Imagine traveling before credit cards. I go to Europe now with one piece of plastic and not worry about it, or two. Versus
you can have just your phone. You don't have to have plastic anymore.
Yeah.
What about your dentist? How many people are sitting there going, gosh, I'm so grateful for my dentist. Listen, if you've ever, I broke a tooth a couple of years ago, and trust me when I tell you, I was deeply grateful that I had access to a dentist, which not all people do.
Yeah. And the third category I think it's fair to say is like, think about something that almost seems comically minuscule, right? So the example I give is because I rollerblade, I'm always lacing up. I'm like, the little plastic on the end of my laces, right? When one of them frays, I'm like, oh, like this is impossible, right? Like
it is impossible though
for that, right?
Yeah.
So I think this goes to we're saying about the pacing. When there are tools, when the time is right, but as a coach provider, you make sure that you're following as always your client, and understanding your scope of practice and what you know. So what you and I be comfortable with might be different than someone else who has more and less experience. So all these tools, the more you as a provider can get, the more you understand how to meet them where they're at and or when to defer. And so with that, Teresa, I'm going to transition to, with timing being short here, you've created this awesome course on this. I would love to, if you can go a few minutes over. We're fine going a little over. We started a minute or two late. What prompted you to help, I guess, seeing how prevalent it was, but can you talk about what you've created for us providers to understand this better way to serve our clients?
Yeah, so I started recognizing, because of my training and background, how grief underlines so many situations that we run into, not just death, but so many. And with that awareness, I started working with a lot of HR teams for these big companies I work for around recognizing that, offering support, and helping them understand, how their managers can better do it. Anyway, all that to say, I had all this great material about how to do this training, and I thought, coaches really that's not part of our training typically. We're not really trained in how to recognize grief, especially underlying grief. And many people also just are not naturally able to sit with someone who's having big emotions. And so I decided to develop this. It seems like a gap in our training. And I hope it will be helpful. The training actually results in a certification and a badge. And what a couple of people have told me is they found it very helpful in terms of getting work, especially as health coaches. Because if you're working as a health coach, or as a corporate coach for that matter, it's important that you understand these things, because whether you're working with a physician's office that you're being given patients who need to lower their cholesterol and it's your job to help them, they're dealing with some underlying grief because, no one thinks they're going to get older. No one thinks that their triglycerides are going to go high. No one, we just don't.
The loss of eating whatever you want, right? When you're
Yes.
young, there's a loss of the freedom of just like eating
Yes.
without consequence, right?
Yes, exactly. I'll give you a good example. So I've had some things going on with my eyes, and I've been seeing a retinal specialist. And the thing she said to me recently, and this is a genetic thing, and she said to me recently, I think you can actually stall this, or maybe you can improve it if you cut out sugar entirely. I'm grieving that. I'm grieving it.
Entirely is a very big word.
Entirely is a big word. And then we think about addiction. When you tell someone you can never, ever have a drink again, ever, for the rest of your life. And a lot of people are in recovery. So as coaches, we have to be aware of those things and hold them gently, but professionally. And that's what I think this training helps people do.
Hold them gently but professionally. So many beautiful phrases and wisdom you shared today, Teresa. And so where can people find out about this course if they're interested in learning more? Like where can people find you and connect with you and take or learn more about this course that you've created?
Well, I would love for them to go to your site. I believe Vibely has it up there. So just, look on the LinkedIn page. I think you have a link there, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. So that's probably the easiest place to go. But people can also email me if they would like. My email's super simple. It's my first initial and my last name. So it's T Angle Young. No, don't do that. I'll never get that. Just go to the LinkedIn page.
Sounds good. And to everyone listening, thank you for today's episode. Teresa, thank you so much for what you've been doing for the profession, for the people you're serving, and for us to help understand this really it's a topic to me that there's always more to learn and explore. It's such and it really does underline all of change. There's a grief and loss, even when it's for a quote unquote good reason. So I think for any kind of provider, this was a big knowledge gap. And I think it is foundational. So thank you for helping us learn more. Thank you for your time here today. And would love to have you on to explore so many of these fun neuro topics and how we can understand how can we be curious about using neuro to improve our lives. So thank you so much, Teresa, for all you've done.
I could talk to you all day. Thanks for having me on.
Don't tell me it's a good time, Teresa, because I'll do it.
I know. I'm happy.
Take care, everyone. We'll see you guys next week for our next